Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable, and will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength, and his wonderful works that he has done. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together Psalm 78. This is a long psalm, 72 verses, and the point of this is to remind the people of God of the things that God has done of old. The story of God's grace and men's rebellion is an ongoing story, and that is what the story of Israel is, and that's what the story of God's dealing with mankind is. As God seeks to lead us to walk in his ways, but we keep turning away from his ways, and there are consequences of that. So in this psalm, he says, open your ears to the words of my mouth. I'm telling you a story. I'm telling you an old story that you know, but you have not heeded. You've heard it, but you have not understood it. It's the story of our fathers, where they've come from, how God has dealt with them. And we need to tell this story to our children so that they too can praise the Lord and experience his strength and his wonderful works. Well, let's continue reading the psalm stanza by stanza and see how he develops this story of old. Verse 5, For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, whose spirit was not faithful to God. God has dealt with the nation of Israel in history. He established a testimony in Jacob. This is a testimony to himself. God's dealing with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but particularly the descendants of Jacob, the children of Israel, has had a purpose and a direction. So he gave them the law. He gave them commandments, that they should teach their children, who should teach their children, that they might have their hope in God and not forget what he has done, that they might keep his commandments and not rebel against God as their fathers did, because as a nation they promised to follow God, and therefore it is quite reasonable for God to expect that that nation will do so. And we also should learn from the instructions that God gave his people, that we also might have hope and not despair, forgetting the works of God. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God. They refused to walk in his law and forgot his works and his wonders that he had shown them. Ephraim was the younger son of Joseph. In the time in Egypt, Joseph, having been appointed governor of Egypt, had a very prominent role in the nation. But the descendants of Ephraim did not keep the covenant of God. They refused to walk in his law, and so they forgot his works that he had done. What were these works? Verse 12. Marvellous things he did in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters stand up like a heap. In the daytime also he led them with the cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness, and gave them drink in abundance like the depths. He also brought streams out of the rock, and caused waters to run down like rivers. The deliverance of Israel from Egypt was a most marvellous event, a historical event. Anybody who goes and just lives in the wilderness will die unless they have food and unless they have water and unless they have shade and warmth. For the desert gets very cold at night, it gets extremely hot in the day, and there is no food, there is no water. But God kept his people in the wilderness for 40 years, providing food, providing shelter, providing light at night, and providing water. Surely they can recognise the mighty power of God. But verse 17 says, no, they sinned even more against him by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness. And they tested God in their heart by asking for the food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke against God and said, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rock so that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide meat for his people? They rebelled and sinned against God, doubting that God would provide for them. In Psalm 23, we're familiar with the phrase, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. This was David's testimony. God had helped him. And this could have been the testimony of the nation of Israel. But no, they tested God in their heart. They doubted God's power, even though they'd seen so much that God had already done. They doubted that he could continue to provide for them. God took this as an insult. Therefore, verse 21, the Lord heard this and was furious. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel, because they did not believe in God, and did not trust in his salvation. Yet he had commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven, had rained down manna on them to eat, and given them of the bread of heaven. Men ate angels' food. He sent them food to the full every day. 6 days a week. On the seventh day they rested. For 40 years God gave them manna in the wilderness. But even seeing on a daily basis the provision of God, they didn't believe in God. They didn't trust him. And so he was furious at them. You also will get cross when you deal honestly and openly and caringly for somebody, but they do not trust you and do not cooperate with you. Nevertheless, God in his faithfulness continued to feed these people. And, verse 26, he caused an east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He also rained meat on them like the dust, feathered fowl like the sands of the sea, and he let them fall in the midst of their camp, all around their dwellings. So they ate and were filled. He gave them their own desire. They were not deprived of their craving. But while their food was still in their mouths, the wrath of God came against them and slew the stoutest of them, and struck down the choice men of Israel. God showed his power, but when he acted with judgment as well, so that those who thought themselves greatest were cut down. He slew the stoutest of them, the ones who thought that they would survive even though others wouldn't survive, those who complained, he's going to kill the children. God didn't kill the children. He slew the stoutest of them and struck down the choice men of Israel, the strong, because the Lord loves the poor and needy. He resists the proud. In spite of this, they still sinned. They did not believe in his wondrous works. Therefore their days he consumed in futility, and their years in fear. We too must trust God and believe in him. Trust him to keep his word.